The offer was spoken softly, but it landed like thunder in the dusty office of the ranch house. $10,000. For one night. Not for pleasure, not for sin, at least not in the way the men in town whispered, but for access, for presence, for a chance to test what they believed was impossible. Eli Mercer stared at the man across the table, his jaw tight, his hands rough and scarred from years of honest labor. Outside, the desert wind swept across the plains, carrying the echo of hooves and the distant silhouette of the mountains, where his wife's people once roamed free. They called her a giant, not because she towered over the world in cruelty, but because she carried a strength that made weak men uncomfortable. Tall, broad-shouldered, unbending, with eyes that saw through lies the way fire sees through dry grass. Ayanna was Apache, and she was his wife, bound to him not by possession but by choice. The man making the offer didn't understand that. He thought money could open any door. Eli's mind raced, not with greed, but with anger, with fear, and with the memory of all the times. Ayanna had been treated like a spectacle rather than a human being. The town had never forgiven her for refusing to shrink. They whispered that Eli was controlled, that he lived in her shadow. What they didn't know was that he had never felt more protected, more seen, than the night she stood between him and 3 armed men and told them, calmly, to leave before the earth remembered their names. The offer was supposedly for a private meeting, a ceremonial night of observation. Nothing improper. Just a chance for outsiders to witness the legendary Apache woman they couldn't stop talking about. Eli slowly pushed his chair back, his pulse pounding. He thought of the ranch's debts, the failing fences, the cattle lost to drought. $10,000 could save everything. But at what cost? When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You don't get to buy my wife." The man smiled thinly, replying that the choice wasn't his alone. That night, as the moon rose pale over the desert, Eli walked home, carrying the weight of a decision that would test not only his love, but his understanding of what strength truly meant. Ayanna listened in silence as he told her everything. She did not rage. She did not laugh. She simply stood, her presence filling the small room, like a mountain fills the horizon. When he finished, she placed her hand over his heart and told him something. He would never forget that people had been trying to buy her story, her body, her spirit since the day she was born, and that the only power they ever had was fear. "If we accept," she said, "we do it on our terms, not as something owned, not as something sold, but as something witnessed." Eli realized then that this was not about money or pride. It was about dignity. Outside, the fire crackled and the land listened. If you're drawn into stories of strength, culture, and love that refuses to bow, make sure you subscribe now, because stories like this are not told often enough. The night came, with a cold wind and a sky so clear, it felt like the stars were watching. The visitors arrived uneasy, their confidence brittle, their eyes darting toward the tall figure waiting by the fire. Ayanna wore traditional markings, not for them, but for her ancestors. Eli stood beside her, not in front, not behind, finally, understanding that partnership meant sharing the ground beneath their feet. There was no indulgence, no spectacle, no submission to curiosity. Instead, Ayanna spoke. She told stories of survival, of women who carried nations on their backs, of men who learned that strength without respect rots from the inside. One by one, the visitors' bravado faded. They had come expecting dominance or mystery, but what they found was truth, uncomfortable, grounded and impossible to buy. The man who had offered the money shifted in his seat, realizing too late that the night was not unfolding under his control. When dawn finally broke, Ayanna dismissed them with a single sentence: "You came to see a giant. Now you know giants do not kneel." The money was left behind, untouched, until Eli finally picked it up, not as payment, but as restitution for every insult swallowed, every boundary crossed. The ranch survived, but more than that, the town changed, slowly, reluctantly, yet undeniably. And as Eli and Ayanna watched the sun rise over land that remembered them both, he knew that the real story wasn't about the offer. It was about what cannot be bought. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see strength differently, subscribe to the channel now. These are the stories that deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss the next. One morning did not arrive gently. After that night, it came with consequences. Word spread faster than wildfire through dry grass, twisting truth into rumor, dignity into defiance, and courage into threat. Some said Ayanna had humiliated powerful men. Others said Eli had finally lost control of his giant Apache wife. The Sioux town split down the middle. Those who feared her more than ever, and those who for the first time began to respect her. Eli felt the shift immediately. At the market, conversations stopped when he walked past. At the saloon, eyes followed him like loaded guns. He understood now that standing tall came with a price, and hiding was no longer an option. One evening, as the sky burned red with sunset, 3 ranchers rode up to his land, not with weapons, but with unease. They spoke of pressure, of investors, of outsiders who wanted Apache land cleared, stories erased, fences redrawn. They hinted that Ayanna was the problem, that if she disappeared from sight, peace would return. Eli listened, his hands clenched. But before he could answer, Ayanna stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply told them that the land remembered who walked it with honor and who tried to own what was never theirs. The men left quieter than they arrived. That night, Eli admitted his fear, not of losing the ranch, but of losing her to the weight she carried alone. Ayanna confessed something she had never said out loud, that being strong did not mean she never grew tired. That being a symbol meant she was rarely allowed to be human. Eli realized then that love was not proven by protection alone, but by presence. He promised her that whatever storm came next, he would not stand beside her in silence. He would speak, even if his voice shook. Days later, the storm arrived in the form of legal papers and armed escorts claiming the ranch sat on disputed territory, old tricks, new masks. But this time, Ayanna did not face it alone. Elders arrived. Women from neighboring lands stood shoulder to shoulder. Even a few townsfolk, quiet ones who had watched and learned, came forward. Strength, Eli learned, was contagious when it was rooted in truth. As the sun set on another hard day, Ayanna placed her hand in Eli's and told him the offer of $10,000 had never been about money. It had been a test of whether they would bend to fear or rise into something larger than themselves. They had chosen the harder path, and though the road ahead was uncertain, it was theirs. If you believe stories of resilience, love, and unbreakable identity deserve a voice, subscribe to the channel now. These stories don't just entertain. They remind us who we are when the world tries to buy our silence.